Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Safina Theard-Lewis, the Communications, Marketing, and Design intern with the Children's Environmental Health Network, and I'm also a graduate student at Rollins School of Public Health at here in Atlanta at Emory University. So I just wanted to thank everyone for joining the Children's Environmental Health Network for a panel discussion with our wonderful 2024 Child Health Advocates and now Youth Leadership Awardees. We are so pleased to host this conversation with these exceptional leaders who have consistently demonstrated their devotion to protecting children's health and health equity through their work to achieve environmental and climate change action and justice. We've been looking forward to this event in the lead up to Children's Health Month in October and Children's Health Environmental Health Day on October 10th. So I'm going to turn it over to Ense, who is the Executive Director of Children's Environmental Health Network and today's moderator.
Thank you so much, Safina. Welcome, everyone. A big congratulations to all of our award recipients. We really take great honor every year and going through a range of nominations and even past recipients and just recalling, how fantastic of a group you all are soon to become alumni in. I know it's not why you do the work, but we do feel strongly it is important to take a step back, especially around a time like Children's Environmental Health Day, a day of action, a day of assessment, a day of holding ourselves collectively accountable as we reinvigorate ourselves to be stronger, to do more, to push harder into the next year. So just a big thank you for all that you do, the way you show up for children and the way you show up for justice and health and all the things, climate. And I look forward to our discussion today. I'd also like to take a minute to acknowledge the Indigenous peoples who have stewarded the lands that we are all on today throughout generations. While we meet today on a virtual platform, we acknowledge the impacts of the land and the importance of the land, which we call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. So what we're going to do for the first part of this segment is I have the distinct pleasure of introducing one by one each of the award recipients in a very brief way. Please do go to our website where you'll get a much broader bio, and we do encourage you to do that. But we wanted to be respectful of the time. These are very distinguished panelists, and there's a lot to say about them. And we wanted to just be nice and crisp and efficient so that you can hear from them and not me. Our awardees will use a few minutes to first give an overview of their own kind of introductory comments, and then we'll go into some questions that we have, and certainly we welcome any questions that you all have as audience participants. Please just post those in the Q&A box, and then of course, if you would like to highlight any resources, any other links, please put those in the chat as participants. We appreciate that. So I'm going to start with Mary Anise Hegler, who's a writer, an editor, a teacher, and a podcast host, who is now our Child Health Advocate Media Arts Award recipient. Congratulations, Mary.
Thank you. Yeah, those were some of the words I was going to use to introduce myself. I am based in New Orleans, and I am an author who just this year published my first two books. The first was a children's book entitled The World Is Ours to Cherish. It just came out in last February, and it was written as a letter to my nephew about the coming climate crisis and all the things that I hope I'm able to find the words to say to him when he gets to be of age where he starts asking those sorts of questions. I also published a novel called Troubled Waters, which also talks about climate change. I've written a lot of essays about climate change, and largely when I look back at the things I've written, almost always they're written with a lens toward the inner child, if not toward an actual child. So yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Mary. Barry Sheik is the founder and technical director of Naturepedic, and he is our Child Health Advocate Business Award recipient this year. Welcome, Barry.
Thank you, Nse. It's really a pleasure to be here. I got involved back in college in 1970, where the joke in engineering school was the solution to pollution is dilution. Very funny, except Lake Erie was dying back then. Okay. And to this day, it's illegal for commercial fishing in Lake Erie because the mercury level is so high. So I learned a lesson, and the lesson was you can't just pollute the environment and get away with it forever. You get away with it for a while, but not forever. Okay? So 20 years, I became an environmental engineer. 20 years ago, I walked into a store to buy a crib mattress for our first grandchild, and I realized that the crib mattresses were made with polyurethane foam, flame retardants, vinyl, phthalates, antimony, pesticides, glues, GMOs, and I was shocked. The salesperson told me, come on, it's no big deal. If it wasn't safe, the government wouldn't allow it to be sold. And I looked at the salesperson and said, I don't know who's crazy. It's either me or you. I think it's you. Anyways, we made a crib mattress, put it on the internet, and people started sending me money. And that's how we got into business. The problem is that most babies are sleeping for 15 hours every day on toxic chemicals. We have to stop that. And it's our intention to work with the Children's Environmental Health Network to make this a public issue and change everything. And that's where we're going.
Thank you, Barry. I didn't realize we were from the same area of the country. Lake Erie is not far from where I grew up, outside of Buffalo, New York. So let's talk more about that. Valencia Bednar is a student volunteer with Moms Clean Air Force and is one of our two Now Youth Leadership Award recipients. Valencia, congratulations. Welcome.
Thank you.
Would you like to make any introductory comments? Okay. Okay. We've got more to say later, I know. Donald Hoppert, or Don, is the Director of Government Relations for the American Public Health Association and is our Child Health Advocate Policy Award recipient this year. Welcome, Don. Thank you. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. And I was thinking back on my time working with the Children's Environmental Health Network, which dates back almost 30 years. I was a young staff member in the office of Congressman, then Representative Sherrod Brown of Ohio. So I have that Lake Erie connection as well. And a woman named Carol Strobel reached out to me to set up a meeting to talk about children's environmental health. And from that day forward, Carol and I became very good friends. And after I left Capitol Hill and went to work for the American Public Health Association, I met Nse through that network. And of course, she became the executive director of the Children's Environmental Health Network, continued to work with her and Carol and Tracy Colian for many years. So it's been a really, really great, valuable experience to work with you all. I'm so honored. I was so shocked to receive your nomination of me for this award. And I just want you to know that it really means a lot to me. So looking forward to the discussion to talk about how we can continue to work together.
Thank you, Don. Thank you for bringing Carol in. For those that don't know, Carol Strobel was and still is in our hearts an incredible pillar in this field, taught me a lot, and was an incredible advocate for children in the Children's Environmental Health Network in the field. So thank you for bringing her into this space. Ruth Santiago is an environmental health advocate and lawyer, and she's our Child Health Advocate Community Award recipient this year. Congratulations, Ruth. Welcome.
Thank you, Nsedu, and hello, everyone. Happy to be here. I'm based in Salinas, Puerto Rico, southeastern Puerto Rico. I work with community and environmental groups, especially on issues related to pollution from power plants. We're very overburdened here, especially in southeastern Puerto Rico, with the largest and most polluting power plants in the archipelago. And we're also, you probably all know, part of what is known as Hurricane Alley. And so we've done a lot of work around transformation of the electric system in the context of the climate crisis and the increasing and more intense climate events that we're seeing here in Puerto Rico, and how that especially affects children and poor people and Afro-descendant people in particular. So yeah, I think I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. Vinav Shah is a student and founder of Aware Schools and creator of Climate Crisis Card Game, and is another one of our now Youth Leadership Award recipients. And I know we look forward to you sharing more about these tools and resources that you've had a big part of establishing and creating. Welcome and congratulations.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm so honored and thankful to receive this award. I think it's like interesting because as a student, like children's environmental health is especially important to me because ultimately other kids are a large part of my community. So when I do things, I have, like other kids and students in mind. And I'm especially interested in air equity and air policy aimed at students. So my organization, Airware Schools, works with lower income elementary and middle schools around the country to build their own grassroots air quality monitoring programs. And actually, recently we started a new initiative, which is a citizen science initiative, allowing them to borrow air sensors from us, which is really exciting. And not only do we try to like make their classrooms a healthier place, but it's also important to us that it's coupled with education. So one of the things I did was create the Climate Crisis board game, which emphasizes how individual actions like recycling or using public transportation can protect the environment and ultimately community health. The other thing we do is the Policy Podcasts Initiative, which help students to learn about different careers in science and policy and environmental protection, and also offers different perspectives on this. So yeah, thank you so much. And I'm honored to receive this award.
Very impressive. Thank you. Thank you. Looking forward to the discussion. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Sakobi Wilson is the Director of the Community and Community Engagement of Environmental Justice and Health and Professor at Maryland Institute for Applied Environmental Health at the University of Maryland School of Public Health. He's the co-director of the US EPA Region 3 Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Center, otherwise known as TICTAC, and director of the Mid-Atlantic Environmental Justice Fund. Well-deserved. Welcome, Sakobi. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Really excited about the award. And, this recognition is really a reflection of all the hard work of all the communities that I work with. So as y'all know, we do a lot of environmental justice work with frontline offensive communities in the Mid-Atlantic, but across the region. So giving shout outs to folks like Omega Wilson in North Carolina, Gary Grant, Naima Muhammad, Mr. Fraser Rahim, Omar Muhammad down in South Carolina, Dr. McLean in Savannah, the folks in Uniontown in Alabama, the Gulf Coast Consortium with Dr. Bullock, the right, all those community groups we worked with over the years. And of course, all the Match and TICTAC Hub partners. I mean, so the work that we do with CEHN is really about serving, empowering folks who have been impacted by environmental justice. So in children, a really important population is going back in time. My history with INSEE. INSEE introduced me in many ways to the environment section of APHA. She was one of the former leaders of the environment section. I ended up becoming a leader of the environment section. And also, we did children's environmental health work in the environmental section. And that's, I'm not sure how many years ago. We're still young, INSEE. But then moving forward in time, our work together, looking at exposure of children in daycare settings to chemicals, and working with Leslie and Kiros, who's now at Hopkins, and that, working with Wakaria Poole and Central Day Employee Familiar on that project. So just a lot of important work as relates to children. And even some of my work in the Carolinas, we have a project looking at disaster impacts, natural technological disasters in the Carolinas, and communities with EJ issues, but specifically looking at elderly populations and children. So I like to end and pass the mic back. How you gonna put America first if you don't put your kids first? So
hey, thank you. Well said, Sakobi. And yes, we are still young. This work tries to break us down, but we are still young. Thank you all so much. I'm going to move over to Safina for our first question. We're going to get into our discussion now. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, okay. Well, okay, so the first question, each of you all work towards improving children's health and health equity through different approaches and very diverse backgrounds. So given your unique expertise and experience, how do you feel that the confluence of today's significant intersectional issues like impacts from the COVID pandemic, climate change, racism, et cetera, affect children's environmental health? And what are the projected needs and continuing challenges? You can answer one part, whatever part strikes you of this question.
We certainly have to work with Children's Environmental Health Network to educate the youth, okay? And we need to educate them regarding the issues, including the need for testing of products, you know, and certifications, and to reject greenwashing. And an organization like Children's Environmental Health Network can take the lead with that. And I think all of us should be willing to join you know, with you and educate the kids. The kids are waking up. They're our friends. There's no problem. We just gotta step up and do the job.
Yeah, I'll jump in and say that we just had a symposium last week on environmental justice, and we had a youth panel, looking at young folks who are working on environmental justice issues in the Mid-Atlantic. And it was powerful to see folks, young people, from, I think Ryan was one of the students from Curtis Bay, working on the incinerator fights and truck traffic in South Baltimore. And we have young people we work with our air quality monitoring project in Prince George County high schools. So young people are, you think about children, they're a susceptible population, but there's some vulnerabilities in many cases they don't have control over, like where they live, right? What kind of hazards have been impacted by climate hazards. So we have to make sure we engage young people and pass the baton to them, because they're not just generation next, as I said last week, they're also generation now. So I think that the work of the network is very important to show what the problems are, but also solutions. And the children, young people, they have the solutions. So that's why this award ceremony is important. The work of the network is important, but why, we should make sure that children and young people are taking the lead in this work.
Yeah, I agree definitely that, education is such an important role. And also, when we think about engaging young people to solve environmental health issues, I think that it's important that it's community driven and that the community kind of creates their own projects. So it's not just an external organization reaching out to a school, for example, and trying to help them create air sensors, but also trying to help the school itself develop their own program, which allows youth to take lead and build sustainable solutions that will last a long period of time. And I think part of that starts with education. So, having educational activities that are aimed at students and allowing them to get involved and build a pathway for them to become leaders in environmental health.
Yeah, I'll
Yeah.
just
Oh,
add on.
sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I'll just add on to that when I first started working on climate issues, well, I should say, let me back up a little bit. When the Obama administration first came in and I was working on climate issues, there was not a lot of discussion around health impacts of climate change. And we met with them many, 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 many times. I know Nsei was part of those meetings, and many of our other colleagues at the other health, medical, and public health groups just continued to kind of hammer that with them, including from the children's health perspective. And I will tell you, by the second term of the Obama administration, their lead messaging around climate change was about the health impacts, particularly around how it impacts vulnerable populations, including kids and minority communities. So I think that, in addition, children, I think, are great messengers for these efforts when they're joining in with the rest of us. I think it's a win-win, and I think we have seen a lot of progress. There's a long way to go, but I'm pleased that we've been able to really highlight the need to focus on these issues because of the serious health impacts that they have on the nation's youth and really all of our vulnerable populations.
I think they during COVID, I feel like we have a positive and negative impact. So the negative is like we're in our homes and we couldn't care less about anything but video games. Um, but I also feel like if we can't do anything, then we might as well go into a bunch of EPA websites and everything and look stuff up.
I'll add, I think one of the tricky things in this area right now is that I know we want to educate the youth, we want to empower the youth, but it becomes difficult sometimes to do both of those things without feeling like you're dumping the weight of the world on their shoulders, which I know is not something that I'm hearing on the panel, but like something I often hear is that the next generation will solve it. Like their Gen Z has got this under control. And when I have talked to younger folks, when I've talked to, mentored some of these like youth activists, what I hear is a sense of abandonment by previous generations or older generations, because we're still here. I think so. It's important to, at the same time that we're empowering them and educating them, making it clear to them that it's not their burden to carry all alone, and that the older generations are not going to just stop and give them the ball to run with. So, yeah, that's just one thing I wanted to uplift.
I'll also jump in. So you mentioned intersectionality in your question and how, let's say, multiple crises, especially in the context of Puerto Rico and the territories, are impacting child health. For example, obviously hurricanes, these more intense and frequent storms have terrible impacts on children. The children that are already experiencing very high poverty rates, very high rates of medical health issues, like, for example, in Puerto Rico, we have the highest, in the entire nation, the highest rate of childhood asthma. It's a similar situation in other territories. And so poverty weighs heavily and intersects with environmental health issues that are also aggravated by the climate crisis and what's happening in terms of, these constant storms. And often we're seeing the lack of basic services that goes on for extended periods of time. You may have heard that in Puerto Rico, we're constantly seeing, even with like this year, with a storm that didn't really become a hurricane, how the power outages extended for a long time. Children, of course, miss out in schools and other services when there are power outages. That those outages are often accompanied by water cutoffs because a lot of the water supply depends on electricity, and so yeah, a lot of these issues are interconnected and affect children disproportionately.
Absolutely. You all have raised really important topics to these questions. And I think you all have sort of touched on this next part of this question where with the growing role of youth climate change activists in driving environmental climate change, you all really talked about how can more youth contribute and advocate for environmental health issues? But another part of this question is how can the rest of the movement better support the youth? I think, Mary, you mentioned that of like this dumping on the next generation. And so if anyone wanted to sort of speak on that of like how can this world sort of support the youth who are trying to change things?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things is civil society groups. If we think about 4-H, green clubs, even local initiatives like river cleanups, all of these things need leaders, and these young people need mentors to guide them along the path. And so, what I think would be really helpful is that people who could step up and form some of these initiatives, and also helping young people create their own community, whether that is through a sustainability club or some kind of initiative. All of these things would be helpful.
I'll jump in real quick. Just another shout out to Wakaria Pool and Central Del Porto Familiar. Her daughter is involved in their eco promoters programs. I have a promoters program. So they have an eco promoters program. So they're getting the young people involved in work around environmental justice and stormwater management. And the young people actually wrote a book that they published. So that's a way to really get folks involved. The use of arts, right? I think and humanities is very important. I have, just to shout out my kids, I have two little ones who get me all the time about climate change issues and why I'm not doing more than what I'm doing. And they're both artists. And so, but definitely Wakaria and her example, her organization, but how she's brought in her own kids and other children to the Eco Promoters program is important. And I also think, more mentoring and collaboration between different generations. So when you think about environmental justice, we talk about intergenerational justice. That accessibility, participation, and that mentoring is important, and also making sure that we are training up the next generation, having succession plans, so folks can move into these spaces where they're getting the support that they need. So I think that the promoters program, eco promoters program, is an example. I think there's other examples out there in the EJ movement where I think groups are doing a really good job of engaging young people. We have an environmental justice scholars program for undergrad students. We've done work with K-12. We work with high schools. We also have a climate justice fellows program for folks with different ages who can come in. So I think that type of infrastructure that can be developed, provide opportunities for training and also collaboration and mentoring, and also just peer support, right? There's a lot of trauma that folks are experiencing. So it's therapeutic to collaborate and work together, right? And so I think being able to help youth navigate the trauma of climate change, the trauma of this pandemic, which is multiple pandemics, racism, climate change, COVID-19, right? Environmental injustices. That's an important thing too, to recognize how that therapy is needed across our generation. So I'll pass the mic back.
Yeah, I'll build on that because I also wanted to talk about mental health. And I think it's important to make sure that young folks have access to quality mental health services. And I also think that the mental health field needs to be more environmentally aware. I know plenty of people who have been actually harmed by their therapists because their therapist was like, well, climate change can't be that big of a problem, right? So like there are a lot of people in all sorts of care related fields that don't know the severity of the climate crisis, and that can actually do more harm than good. And so I think we need to make sure that people have access to that type of care. I also just think that, we should teach kids that they can do hard things. Hard things have been done before, and sort of demystify this idea that that this is the first time that people have ever had to risk their lives. So connecting the climate crisis and the fight against the climate crisis to other fights for justice and other fights for survival throughout time can make it seem a little bit less insurmountable, and give you more and put it more in this tradition of resistance that has existed against these sorts of power systems throughout time. And then it becomes just, you can connect it more to like your ancestors, to other generations. And it also gets rid of this idea of the generations being against one another and being opposed to one another, because I think that can be really harmful too.
Yes, I'm so appreciative of all of these contributions. I say often, climate change could be considered the biggest children's environmental health issue of our global and our time, because in the way we look at it, climate change is kind of considered the umbrella. We have, of course, many of the environmental issues, justice issues, economic, all of the social ills falling underneath that umbrella. But the reality is climate change is exacerbating already present concerns. It's certainly not helping, right? So also the notion of planetary health, just to kick around, the notion that we don't do ourselves a service by only focusing on, for example, fossil fuel industry and greenhouse gases, if we're not also paying just as much direct attention to the plastics industry that's right behind it, producing many of the same harms, if not worse, as well as many of the residual impacts. So It is daunting for sure. It's daunting for me. I know it's daunting for us as colleagues in this field and movers in this world. And I really appreciate the point of the people we work with. I get asked that question often. What keeps you moving? I had an interview this morning. What gives you motivation? It's the people I have the honor of working with because we're in this together. It's what I'm learning each and every day. 20 some years in, I'm still learning each and every day. And it's the value add that I know we're making. We may not see every single day the results, but it's the cumulative impact, right? Here on this call, we have media and arts, we've got science, we have policy advocates, we have our varied generations, we have community leadership, we have business on this one call, just as us as being leaders. Think about the magnitude of order as we ripple out, kind of like that rock hitting into the water, just kind of rippling out. Anyway, I appreciate that so much. Barry, I've got a question for you. How do you balance the dynamic tension often found in this field, such as the need for a business that is both profitable, but also is working to make the world a better and safer place? It's quite a dynamic that many industries just do not strike well. So would appreciate your thoughts on that.
All right. So a business has to decide what they stand for, what they will promote, and what they refuse to do. Okay? In our case, we stand for environmental improvement. We stand for non-toxic ingredients in all our products. We stand for certifications. All our products are certified by GOTS, Global Organic Textile Standard, by GALS, Global Organic Latex Standard, by Green Guard Gold, by MateSafe. We're the first mattress manufacturer to be verified by EWG, Environmental Working Group. So we've taken a stand, and that's what every business needs to do: is take a stand as to what's important for you and what you're going to stand for. And as far as balancing that with profit, it's not a problem. We're doing just fine because people are not stupid. And when you stand for something and you stick by it, there are a lot of people out there who appreciate that and they'll buy your product. And that's what's happening with us. We keep growing and growing and growing and growing. Okay. And then finally, when enough consumers, understand these issues, then more and more and more manufacturers will shape up and stop the nonsense. And I think that's where we're going. And we just need to educate the public and educate the younger people, and Children's Environmental Health Network can help us do that, and we can help them. We have to work as a team, and we have to educate, and we have to decide what are we standing for. There might be individual differences or minor differences, but we all have to agree that we're standing for environmental justice, and let's just do it. And it can be done. We're doing it every day.
Thank you, Barry. And what's nice is Naturepedic, for example, is a part of the American Sustainable Business Network. So there is this growing trend.
Yep.
I can't speak to what all the other motivations are. You've expressed where you are. I wish all business leaders had the kind of ethic bone that you have, regardless of what the motivations are. The tide is shifting. I know we all needed to shift much quicker, and the paradigm shift, to also include what I'm looking for is for us to be making decisions that put the needs of children and our most vulnerable populations, which there are many of those, children being one, first. That is an exercise we have never yet tried in the United States. I think we make the case that we would put ourselves out of business, which is fine. We should not have to have a nonprofit 34 years in with the same mission that we had from the beginning to ensure that children are not forgotten in the various circles that are influencing our lives every day. So anyway, Barry, from your words to all hopefully much more broader ears out here, I think you're clearly onto something, and we hope that your model continues to take off.
Thank you very much. And you're correct that ASBN is also a very important part of this. We all have to work together as a team.
Thank you.
I love what you said, Barry. That's really important. I feel like a lot of times business is, business is all about finding your customer. And at the end of the day, that's what you did, and people will follow, and it's wonderful. So sort of shifting gears. So Considering the increasing political polarization during this election year, how can we continue to address these critical issues in a very divided government where environmental and public health initiatives are frequently at risk through appropriations, judicial rulings, legislative pushback, and even public opinion? What are some things that we can sort of think about on this topic?
I'm happy to start on that one. I'll start by saying like change is hard and some of it takes a long time, a lot longer than we would like. But you really need to stick to it, even in the face of adversity. I have been through so many different makeups of Congress and the administration, Republican, Democrat, Congress controlled by half and half, and and so you get all these various challenges presented to you. But I think with persistence and doing your best to try to educate decision makers about the issues, because believe me, there are folks from the quote unquote other side who are definitely trying to educate them to their side of the issue. So it's really important that we, as public health, environmental health, children's environmental health advocates, it's so important that we're there as well to kind of offer our views, our opinions, and knowing, like I said, things don't always change overnight, but I have seen some significant changes over the years that I've been doing this, and it makes it worth it. And probably a lot of those things wouldn't have happened if we collectively hadn't kept pushing for them. So that's my 2 cents. And we've done this from, as I mentioned, working with Congress, working with the administration, suing the federal government. I mean, we've done it from kind of all of the various parts of the federal government. So there are ways to get involved, and there are definitely people out there who want to help us do that as well, including law firms who will offer us pro bono services to do some of these, defend some of these mostly EPA rules and other rules that are, that have been implemented to protect kids' health and the health of the other vulnerable populations in the country.
Excellent points. Would anyone else?
Yeah, no, I just want to say that at the community level, I think that there's a way to work towards common goals that benefit the communities and public health more so than at bigger levels, right, where it becomes more abstract. And so I think we need to strengthen those efforts, right? The so-called grassroots efforts and the organization of communities around the issues that impact them. And we'll find that polarization can be minimized. I think just to put it simply, communities, people who are being impacted by some source of pollution, whether it's a dirty power plant or, as someone mentioned, the plastics industry, et cetera, can have much more awareness, right, of those impacts and work better together to overcome them. Although oftentimes we see that these industries try to buy out, the communities or at least some members. But I think the efforts that the Children's Health Network is doing and other organizations like shout out to the PESHUs, to really show what the impacts are of fossil fire generation, centralized power plants, and how there's basically really serious impacts for public health that are aggravated in the case of children. That's the way to minimize the polarization right at the community level.
Yeah, I'll jump in. What Ruth said is was exactly what I was thinking. I mean, so I said before, we do a lot of work with communities, community-driven work. So that's the place to start. Grassroots, work is where you can push back. I know we have Project 2025 and all these other items. And I also think a colleague today said at the Kresge meeting, when it comes to organization on whatever on the side of the right, I'll just say it that way. They've been well organized for many decades. So I think part of the pushback is, we have to be as organized on those who may be more progressive, and making sure that our plans, regardless if it's the federal level or the state level, the local level, that we have, concordance, right? We are collaborating, working together. So if it comes to master plans at the city level, comprehensive plans at the city level, being on your local zoning board, right? Being on your local town council, pushing on your state agencies. That's where, we should spend, definitely the presidential election is important. And I'm not saying, that's very important. But I think what's more important is what's happening at the local level. And to make democracy work, it takes work. Democracy work is not just voting for a presidential election; it's voting for folks on the down ballot and being actively engaged in your local community. So I think if we kind of do both at the same time, we can have a buffer and not lose so much territory, right? It seems like we lose territory every year when it comes to erosion of the Civil Rights Act. The pushback against reproductive rights, et cetera, and how this is impacting children's rights and impacting children's health. So I would say really focus more on local organizations, more grassroots groups, frontline, fence line groups who've been fighting for decades, right? Those are the groups that we should be supporting and collaborating with in this moment and in the future, into the future.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think your message also speaks to your background, which is literally a grassroots. Um, and I agree that like community and a local perspective is so needed when we're always kind of being pulled apart, especially in an election time. And I think that what can allow us to depolarize is this common value that like children's health, and children's health is, something that we can all agree is something that we value. And so I think that when we get involved with community organizations, we meet people who have a different background, a different age, different political affiliations, and we can form, individual bridges with people to depolarize. Because I think that's our goal at an individual level is, get people to see that we have more in common than we do different. And I think that is something that we'll see with, for example, if we go to do a river cleanup or to do a school air quality monitoring initiative, it's working together to do things that are nonpartisan and objectively good. And I think that'll allow us to not only make progress, but also form connections.
Yeah, I think we've really heard a lot of different perspectives from just different generational just experience in on this topic. And I think I'd like to sort of bring this question and bridge it to Valencia. Valencia, what advice do you have for younger kids who want to get involved or parents who want to talk to their kids about environmental health issues?
Yeah, thank you. To the parents, don't hold back until your kid gets bored because then they just tune everything out, like I do. Um, for the kids, you should always pay attention in science class. There's usually like a lot of stuff going on in there. Unless your teacher is boring, of course, then don't pay any attention. Ask lots of questions. Your principal will probably know something. Um, Try forming a club because it's much easier if you have a giant group of people. Um, Always keep trying to learn. Go to the EPA. They probably have a bunch of tips and everything on there. Um, and read and be sure to know your librarians. Yeah.
Excellent, Valencia. I love it. I love the different perspective. I feel like that is such great advice for parents and kids, and it all just comes back to education and getting involved. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, I really appreciate just some good common sense there, right? All right, so it's really important, right? We talked about how overwhelming, how vast, and how large the collective issues are that we are all trying to work in a very intentional and intersectional way. So, what are some recent successes that you all might lift up that we can learn from, or promising new opportunities? How can we ensure that efforts are successful in impacting the communities that need it most? I mean, certainly public health, environmental public health has had many missteps. Nothing is perfect, right? There have been millions of dollars that have been put out there over the decades that don't necessarily have not had the return on investment, if you will, that maybe might have been expected in the beginning. How do we ensure that we have decades of science in this field that we did not have? We cannot claim ignorance anymore. We have lived experience every day. By the way, we have all the negative health outcomes that children are suffering from. I talk about it often. And we have yet to see any end in sight for a lot of this. Childhood cancers are on the rise every year since 1975, the year I was born. That is not genetics. Childhood asthma has kind of gone up, plateaued, gone up, has not gone down. And that's even with acknowledging finally late in the game environmental contributions along with stress, nutrition, a lot of other factors. We're still dealing with lead poisoning, right? The magnitude of order is real. And then climate. And, it's important that we identify the successes. They're not perfect, but at least they're going in the right direction. So I'd love to hear from all of you. If there's at least one, what you might determine to be a success that we're at least on track for, that you want to articulate, would love to hear that.
I jump in. I mean, I think that many of the alternatives to address environmental pollution, degradation, the climate crisis already exist. And unfortunately, we're having a very hard time adopting them. And I'll give you a concrete example with respect to Puerto Rico, and I think that applies to a lot of other places. We know that, at least in terms of emissions, air pollution and that kind of thing, that renewable technology is much better, right, than fossil fire generation, coal, oil, gas, whatever, methane gas. And yet the move in that direction has been very slow. And in fact, we've seen the US, become the first producer and exporter of fossil fuels now in the past few years. And so I think, as Valencia said, so we really need to pay attention, study, learn, and look at the alternatives that really pretty much already exist, and couple those with the community organizing and action and awareness of what, for example, our energy use, what implications that has for other people, right? Especially people in countries where these materials are extracted, and that applies to all forms of energy, right? So we need to be very, have like energy literacy campaigns and really look into how we can reduce impacts from our consumption patterns. But I think a lot of the alternatives are already out there. And we really need to push. Unfortunately, the fossil fuel industry is incredibly powerful even today. And certainly, even the transformation and the transition to renewables needs to take into account not just a technology switch, but also, empowering communities in the process through, for example, going more towards distributed renewable energy, or what you commonly call like rooftop solar or distributed solar, or, parking lot solar, et cetera, coupled with battery and energy storage systems and things like that. So that it creates more local benefit and it contributes more to local economies and local community empowerment.
I'll jump real quick and I'll pass the mic. I think just with the Justice 40 framework, the Executive Order 14096, and the Executive Order Environmental Justice, that's a success. Justice 40 framework 14008, that's a success. The billions of dollars to the Inflation Reduction Act bipartisan infrastructure law, somewhat a success because some of those dollars, as you know, RA is for fracking, some offshore stuff, and CCX, some false plum solutions. But the monies that are out there, I think that sets the frameworks of success. What's happened in our state of Maryland is we have an executive order on climate change. The governor has a grant, Westmore has a grant enough that's focused on children in the state of Maryland. But I would say what's missing is when it comes to all these dollars coming out from the federal family, where's the criteria and say, how's this going to protect children's environmental health? How's this going to help children, right? All the billions of dollars. Somebody go look at the RFA that's out right now, whether it be from HUD, DOT, DOE, EPA. Does it actually say have a criteria on how is this going to help children? That's what's missing, right? With all this money, how we're not going to really integrate, precautionary principles, how we're not going to have a focus on children specifically, reproductive justice, maternal child health, all those connected things, right? And all this money, to me, is a missed opportunity. So I appreciate where we are with Justice 40. I appreciate where we are with all the billions of dollars. That's just a down payment for the trillions that's owed to indigenous peoples, for the trillions that's owed to folks of color, to black folks in this country. It's a start, but we got to get children baked into some of these programs and how it's going to benefit children. So it's definitely a positive step forward, but not having that piece on kids is something that we need to address as we move forward.
I'll give you guys an example of something to talk about positive steps. When I first looked at baby mattresses, and I spoke to some pediatricians and showed them what baby mattresses are made of, and I said, we have polyurethane foam, toxic chemicals, flame retardants, PFAS, antimony, formaldehyde. I said, we got to stop all this. And some of these pediatricians, a couple of them looked at me and said, Barry, you used to be a very respectable person, but it looks like you've turned into a nut job. And I said, no, I'm not a nut job. I'm giving you the truth here. We are poisoning our children, and it's time to stop. And today, people are waking up, and things are they're at least recognizing the problem. In the interim, I also testified to U.S. Congress, the Environmental Subcommittee, and I explained a couple things to them that they did get, and the EPA is waking up. And here's what I told them, just to give you one example. I said, many years ago, there was a lot when there was lead in gasoline. The lead would get into the air and pollute the air. New York City was getting polluted, LA was getting polluted, and so on. And finally, it got to the point where people were really getting hurt. Okay, but the gasoline people said we can't make gasoline without lead, and the engine people, for cars said we can't make our engines without lead in the gasoline. But finally, the EPA said stop it, just stop it. Guess what? My car's running just fine without lead in the gasoline, and so are yours. And so I looked at the environmental committee and I said, it's time for you to do the same thing that was done with that one example. You have to talk to industry and you have to say, stop it. And there are times, I'm not saying we have to do this for everybody and every time, but there are times when you have to talk to some industry people and say, you know what? You are guilty until proven innocent, and you better prove your innocence. It's time for us to get a lot tougher. So yeah, there are changes, and some have come already, and others are coming.
Yeah, speaking of like successes and staying stop, I think like we can think about like the renewable energy transition as well. We've seen so much research accelerate with photovoltaic energy, wind energy, um, and different renewable sources of energy. And so the question is, why aren't we going to it faster? And of course, there are technological challenges, but these are increasingly solved. And so when we want to say stop to some of these companies, or look at it from a policy perspective, then we really need to get more involved with policy.
Yeah, I do a lot of work with the EPA, and I'm at Kamala Harris because of electric school buses.
Thank you. Unfortunately, due to time, this is going to be our last question. Are there any last points on successes as you see it? Again, not perfect, but at least going in the right direction that you'd like to throw in the hat here?
I'll just quickly, again, highlight many of the recent rules that EPA has put out related to power plants, cars, trucks, particulate matter. These are all not perfect. Many of them are written in a way because they need to pass muster in the courts. The Supreme Court dealt EPA a big blow when it came to regulating power plants. So again, I think it's, change is hard. And I think this administration in general has done a pretty good job at trying to make the best out of like kind of a messy situation that they've been dealt by the courts. So just wanted to highlight those. And, we will, APHA and many of my other colleagues will continue to defend those rules, as I said, in Congress and in the courts, because there are significant health benefits for kids and everyone if those rules are fully incredibly implemented. Including the mercury and air toxics rule, which is definitely a kid's rule.
I'll also add another success I think is a little harder to measure, which is that the broader conversation around climate change has just gotten so much more sophisticated. So many more people understand what climate change actually is. They understand better who is responsible, and they're better able to articulate how they want to get involved. That doesn't mean this conversation is perfect. But if you look back 10 years ago, and I'm saying this because my novel was set in 2014. And one of the interesting things about writing about that time frame, which is not that long ago at all, is just how many people who weren't what you would call climate deniers were kind of like, well, it doesn't seem like the scientists are in agreement. Now everybody knows science is in full agreement that climate change is a clear and present danger. People understand that the fossil fuel industry is responsible for it. They understand that they can do things to contribute to it, but they also understand there's a systemic problem. That was not the case. And it wasn't really a conversation that we were having much in public about being worried about climate change, about being scared of climate change in 2014. That was a very lonely experience. I'm sure we all remember those days. And so now you can talk about climate change as like I don't understand why it's not more of a conversation in this election. That's one thing, but it actually has been a very big issue in previous elections. And that's a big victory up against a very big propaganda machine from the oil lobby. So we should be proud of that.
All really good points. So, Kobe, do you have one more point? Oh, okay. No, really good points. I mean, years ago, the polls were much different. I think it's something around 15-ish% of the US might have some ambiguity when it comes to climate change, but the vast majority, we're past, is it happening and have humans been a part of it? We're past that. So the propaganda you hear is not, and the reality is that a lot of our red states are very much benefiting from energy efficient opportunities, solar, wind, and many other climate solution related activities. But again, the line is not to talk about it a lot. So back to Valencia's point about reading, checking, doing some of our own homework. I say to my own kids, I have 4 of them, you might take long to like try to buy a pair of jeans online. Let's take some effort to look at, some of your candidates that you eventually will be voting for, or to Sokovi's point, some of the local activities happening, or Vinav, some of the local, opportunities to contribute in your community, to be a volunteer. Everyone has something they can do. I know everyone is very busy. It could be 5 minutes of your time. It could be a little longer if you're a retiree. There are things and ways that all of us Children's Environmental Health Network, many of our networks and nonprofit partners and others out here could use some assistance. I encourage you to align with a mission-driven organization that really speaks to you, that really drives your passion. I promise you will be given some things that are useful to do. Even signing on to letters that takes 5 minutes. The American Public Health Association puts these out often. Don does all the work and his team. I mean, it could not be easier. So just a real quick recap here. Some of what we heard. We heard that we need to do much better testing of products and reject greenwashing. We need to engage with our youth, and this is critical. So the byway learning, right? They're teaching us while we're hopefully teaching them. They are the most susceptible, vulnerable, and the most to be impacted now and into the future. Generation now, as Jacoby mentioned. Our youth members have the connections and are increasingly taking the lead in protection and justice work. And we have to be mindful and careful about the balance of not dumping the weight of the reality of the work ahead on current and future generations, but rather to show up and to show out, right? And not take the back seat for our youth, with our youth. We need community-driven, sustainable solutions that are critical. That's critical right now. This is not brain science. This has always been a model that works. Community organizing always works, right? Perseverance is key. We have to stay steadfast, focused, and determined to ensure that the health and justice needs of children are considered first and foremost in environmental health and climate change. I just want to remind us there is an executive order on children's environmental health that has been around for a very long time through many administrations. Thankfully, it has at least stayed alive. In addition, and complementary to our environmental justice executive orders and many others that we now have at our as a toolkit, we should totally be leaning on these existing distinctions and laws and principles by which we as a country say we're standing up to. The climate crisis and the range of challenges, the lack of basic services was discussed, the extent for long times and presents additional and unique concerns for children, the climate crisis. These solutions are interconnected and we can't forget that. So again, working in one direction will have a positive on many other contributors. So we have to consider them as much as we can in a comprehensive way. That means we have to be collaborating because even CEHN can't do this all by ourselves, right? The more we collaborate, the stronger we are together, we are able to work more successfully towards these collective goals. Policy, education and training, and building awareness. We need succession plans to keep the momentum up. We didn't get into these problems overnight. We're not going to solve them overnight, but we need to have a way to encourage, to support. Burnout is very real of our leaders. The last thing we need to be showing our next generation is that you work so hard that you work yourself into crisis mode for your own personal health and well-being. We are nothing without our leadership and our people. So we have to also find ways to find joy, to lift that up. And also get serious about the work at hand. So it's an interesting balance. Mentorship, training opportunities, supporting physical and mental health is all key, especially when considering the compounded climate crisis and all the other ills and crises that communities are suffering from. Connecting the climate crisis fights to those that came before us, and the ancestral connection and the cultural connection is right there and is also showing us that our goals are actually attainable. This isn't any bigger than any of us unless we allow it to be. Businesses need to decide what they stand for, what they will promote, and what they will not do. Change is hard, and we need to stick through it. Perseverance and doing our best to educate policy leaders is key. Patience is also necessary. It is up to us to be engaged in our communities. Only us, only we can answer to that. We need people to serve on local boards, committees, and to show up. Community groups that have been around for decades are in need of collective support and engagement. And I can tell you from talking to a lot of our community partners, they have not had what I'll call the luxury of having a children's environmental health staffer or someone that's oriented around the experience that all of you here have. So how do we connect those dots? How do we allow the campaigns that are moving every day to also have the benefit of someone that can speak on the behalf of children? Children and youth are the best, but in lieu of that, let's make sure that we kind of multiply our opportunities here and make sure that we forcefully intersect the child health model into every scenario. And when we talked about solutions, we talked about suggesting, Ruth said, that we have a lot of the needed solutions related to the climate crisis before us today. Sure, we can use new technologies and innovations, but how about we start building on what we already know and what we already have? and the question about why are we not moving faster? We need to get more involved with policy and the public health protections. The Justice 40 framework was identified as a growing success with lots of questions, right? Not perfect, but a growing infrastructure success. The infrastructure law is also somewhat of a success by bringing in unprecedented amount of money into communities that have been in need of them for a long time. But again, this point of how will the impact on that investment show up in return for our most vulnerable, for children, for reproductive justice. Thanks and congratulations to the awardees. You all are amazing in our mind. We value you, we respect you, and we're honored to be in your presence and very excited to see you all in person October 10th. Thank you for showing up tonight. I know it's late on the East Coast, it's getting late on the West Coast and in between. Thank you to all of our participants. Please do reach out to the work that's happening here. We hope that you leave today with at least one component of this discussion that has really drives you, that causes you curiosity, a website you want to go check out, or a group you might want to engage with. I'm sure you have many more, but hopefully at least one. A big thank you to our CEHN team, Hannah, Christy, and our entire team for making this possible. And again, thank you all for putting children first and incorporating children and youth into your work every day. With much appreciation.